Find somewhere comfortable. You don't need to follow along closely tonight. You don't need to remember any of this, or hold on to it, or make sense of it. Just let the words arrive softly, the way sounds do when you're already half asleep. We're in no hurry. There is nowhere to be. Tonight we're going somewhere very old, older than writing, older than farming, older, perhaps, than almost anything we would recognize as civilization. We're going to a hill in what is now southern Turkey, where the land is dry and pale and wide, and where the mountains begin to soften into plain. A place called Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, in the local tongue. You don't need to picture it clearly. Just let it be a hill, somewhere distant, in a world that is quiet and ancient and slow. A hill where something was built a very long time ago by people we will never meet, for reasons we are still gently trying to understand. Let that settle. We are in no rush tonight. Just breathe and drift and let the story come to you. There is something quietly wonderful about what was found at Göbekli Tepe. Not the stones themselves, though the stones are remarkable enough. Tall, T-shaped limestone pillars, carved from the bedrock of the hillside, some of them nearly 6 meters high, ancient and patient and still, standing in soft circles, facing one another across the dim interior of enclosures that were already old before the pyramids were even imagined. The oldest of them were raised around 9,500 years before the Common Era. More than 11,000 years ago. But the thing that settles into the mind most gently, the thing worth staying with tonight, is not the scale of the stones. It is the people who made them. Because here is what we know about those people. They had no pottery. They had no metal tools. They did not yet farm the land in any organized, settled way. They hunted gazelle across the open steppe. They gathered wild cereal from the hillsides. They followed the slow migrations of animals across the seasons, as people had done for tens of thousands of years before them. In almost every sense that archaeologists use to mark the beginning of what we call civilization, these people stood just at the threshold, just before. And yet they built this. They quarried enormous blocks of soft limestone from the bedrock, perhaps 100 meters from the hilltop. They shaped them, slowly, using flint tools. They moved them. They raised them upright, these vast pale columns, and they arranged them in careful circles. 2 tall central pillars facing each other at the heart of each enclosure, with smaller pillars set into the surrounding walls. And then, with patience we can barely imagine, they carved them. The carvings are what make the mind go quiet and still. Snakes, moving in long sinuous lines across the stone. Foxes, rendered with a kind of care that suggests they meant something. Boars, gazelle, wild sheep, birds, particularly vultures, their wings half spread, scorpions and spiders, strange and precise, lions, all of them cut into the limestone by hands that understood what they were doing, that had a sense of composition, of weight, of where an image should sit on a surface. These were not idle marks. They were made with intention. And some of the pillars were not just carved with animals. Some of them were carved as people. Not faces, or not quite. The T-shape of each pillar is itself a human form, if you let your eyes soften. The long, upright shaft is a body. The flat, horizontal top is the head and shoulders. And on several pillars, arms have been carved along the sides. Long, gentle arms resting at the figure's flanks, with hands meeting just below the belt. Some of them wear a loincloth, cut in careful low relief. Some wear a belt. They are figures without faces, looking inward at one another across the quiet interior of the circle. You may have drifted. That's fine. These faceless figures are one of the things archaeologists have sat with longest. What were they? Ancestors, perhaps, rendered in stone so that their presence could be permanent, so that something of them could remain in the world after the breath had left them. Or perhaps something older than the concept of ancestors, something that stood at the edge of the human and the not human, the way certain things do in the oldest layers of thought. Presences, rather than portraits. Beings to stand in the circle with the living, to hold the space. We don't know, and there is something restful in not knowing. There is no need to resolve it tonight. What we do know is this. The people who built these enclosures came from the surrounding landscape. They were not, as far as we can tell, a settled community in the way we might imagine. They moved with the seasons, or most of them did, and yet they returned to this hill, again and again, across generations, across centuries. They repaired the structures when landslides damaged them. They built new enclosures when old ones were too damaged to use. They buried the older circles carefully, filling them with rubble and earth, and built anew on top, as if each burial was itself a kind of ceremony, a slow, unhurried laying to rest. The earliest enclosures are the largest, the most elaborate. As time passed, the structures became somewhat smaller, more rectangular, more domestic in feeling. Life, it seems, was settling in around the ceremonial heart of the place. Houses were being built. Grinding stones were left behind. Thousands of them, worn smooth from processing grain. Cisterns were carved into the bedrock to collect rainwater. The site was becoming something that held people, not just gathered them. Breathe. Archaeologists have found the bones of many animals at Göbekli Tepe. Gazelle, mostly, but also deer and wild boar and birds. The evidence suggests that these were not the remains of everyday meals, but of feasts. Large gatherings, perhaps timed to the seasonal migrations of the gazelle herds across the plain below. People coming together from across a wide landscape, drawn to this particular hill, this particular arrangement of stone and sky, to eat together and work together and stand together inside those quiet circles. It is interesting to wonder what that felt like. To arrive at the hill after days of walking across the open steppe, to see the great pillars standing pale against the sky, to step down inside the enclosure and find yourself in a space that was already ancient even then, already layered with the presence of those who had come before. The two tall central figures facing each other in the dim interior, their carved arms resting at their sides, their shoulders smooth and wide. There is something in this that does not feel entirely foreign. The impulse to gather, the impulse to mark a place as significant, the impulse to carve something into stone so that it lasts beyond a single life, beyond a single season, beyond a single generation's memory. These are impulses that are still with us, in some form, somewhere. We still return to certain places. We still make marks that we intend to outlast us. Just the sound of the words. What happened, eventually, to Göbekli Tepe is itself a kind of slow, patient story. The site was not abandoned all at once. It faded gradually, the way evening fades. By around 8,000 years before the Common Era, The Neolithic structures were no longer in use. The great enclosures were buried or left to fill with wind-blown earth and the slow drift of time. People came back occasionally, in later centuries, in smaller numbers, to live among the ruins in simple structures. But the original purpose, whatever it was, had passed. And then the hill sat there, quiet and unremarkable from above, a slight swelling in the landscape. For thousands and thousands of years, farmers ploughed its surface. Local people gathered stones from it and moved them. The great T-shaped pillars, their tops barely visible, were mistaken for grave markers, for ordinary rocks, for nothing in particular. The hill waited. A survey in 1963 noted it, but misread it. A German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt came back to it in 1994, on a hunch, guided to the site by a local man whose family owned the land. And when Schmidt looked more closely at what was protruding from the ground, something clarified. These were not grave markers. These were the tops of something much older, much larger, much more patient. Excavations began the following year. And slowly, with great care, the hill began to give back what it had been holding. As of recent years, only around 10% of the site has been fully excavated. Geophysical surveys suggest there are at least 20 large enclosures still lying beneath the surface, still waiting in the quiet dark of the hillside. Nearly 200 pillars in total, perhaps. Once all of it is gently brought to light, there is something deeply restful about that, the idea that most of it is still there, still settled in the earth, still patient, as it has been patient for 11,000 years. The carved foxes and snakes and vultures still facing inward in their dark enclosures. The faceless figures still standing with their arms at their sides, still keeping whatever it was they were placed there to keep. We continue softly. The hill is called Potbelly Hill because of its rounded shape against the sky. But the Kurdish name for it, the name used by people who lived near it long before the archaeologists arrived, was Gire Mirazan, Wish Hill. They considered it a sacred place, for reasons that had likely been passed down and distorted and softened over more centuries than anyone could count. Something lingered there, in the shape of the landscape, in the way the hill sat at the edge of the mountains and looked out over the wide plain. Something that made people, across many different ages, feel that it was not an ordinary place. It is not an ordinary place. It is a place where, 11,000 years ago, people who had not yet invented the wheel stood together in circles of stone sleep well,